thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. Download the app today.
This is Up for a Chat with your hosts, Cyndi O'Meara and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Cyndi O'Meara.
And I'm Kim Morrison. This week, we have an incredible guest on the show, Dr Michelle Woolhouse. This holistic doctor and integrative health specialist has over 2 decades of experience practicing not only as an in-clinic GP and postgraduate training in a range of disciplines, she also has a real passion for hypnotherapy, nutritional medicine, acupuncture, and mind-body medicine. Cyndi and I are so freaking excited to welcome you, beautiful Michelle, to Up for a Chat.
Oh, thanks, guys. So good to see you again.
Well, she's one of your kind, Kimmy. She's one of your kind. She's a hypnotherapist. I know.
I know. Well, I'm just going to dive in here because, Michelle, I just want to know exactly, you've trained as a GP, you've worked in all of these areas. Could you take us back? What got you into medicine? And then also what led you into the real holistic integrative aspects and why you've chosen all the modalities that you have?
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's a big question. I went into medical school when I was 17, and I think I just had this real passion to help people ever since I was little, but I also had a real love of science. So I think my first present I remember getting was a chemistry set, and the second one was a microscope. That's kind of, showing and revealing my true kind of colours. But I really loved science. I really had a curious mind, and I was fortunate enough to suit the system and get the marks and get into medicine. And then I guess through medical school, it really is a tough journey. It's grueling. It's long hours. It's very patriarchal. It's quite cruel at times. And there's not really very much emotional support at all. So I ended up medicine, as I say, kind of a shell of my former self. Like my spirit really had been well and truly kind of crushed. And I guess it was really part of my own recovery that I went into more mind, body, and nutritional and holistic and integrative medicine. And so I found myself quite distressed. I was working at the Alfred Hospital as a second-year resident, and I was working in infectious diseases. And that's at that stage, it was the sort of mid-90s. And the AIDS epidemic was still alive and well. And we had some medications at that stage, but still there was a lot of young people dying of the disease, and in such a cruel kind of way. And I really crumbled. I think I had no real sort of emotional support. And I ended up at a retreat in Byron Bay and did some meditation and just had the most profound change in things like sleep, my anxiety. I think I cried for the first couple of days. And then that just led on a journey of a really broadened aspect or a broadened appreciation for the human condition and also what health means. It means more than just the absence of disease, and really being trained in a sickness management system rather than a healthcare system. And I guess a pursuit of my own well-being and my own health led me naturally down these lines of nutrition, mind-body medicine, meditation, looking at the subconscious, my patterns and what led me to who I am and how I can best be not just the best person I can be, but also the calmest and most at peace person I can be. That's still a work in progress, girls. But that's essentially the journey.
Well, it's a powerful one, isn't it? Because, and sadly, and I think Cyndi will agree with me, we've interviewed a number of general practitioners who literally do go in with the same intention and desire to support and help others. Like that really is the drive for wanting to be in medicine combined with a love of science. What saddens me is that women and men like yourself who have this passion, to hear you say it is soul-destroying and crushing and grueling and patriarchal, it doesn't inspire a lot of hope in the positives of health how have you chosen to use that platform instead of getting depressed and down and out of medicine into making it into something more grand with hope as opposed to fear?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question too. Look, I think hope is such a powerful part of the whole medical journey. And I think the older that I've got, the more sort of emboldened I've become in many ways. I sort of realized at a point where I think some doctors do live in fear, and being in a system like that, there's certainly some stories of people having a sense of being targeted, for doing different kind of, I guess, more expansive sort of medicine ideas. I mean, in Western medicine still is a beautiful system, and still at a core, I think, is a heart that beats true in many ways. There still is incredible practitioners out there doing incredible work. I guess for me, with that real passion and interest into mind-body medicine, it was difficult at the start to really, I guess, find the right levels of colleagues. But as the language and the science and the appreciation for the powerful nature of mind-body and body-mind and somatic therapy and now trauma-informed care, there feels like there's a lot more room for the understanding of humanity itself. And so as much as it's easy to lose hope sometimes if we hone into the negatives, by sort of seeing the big picture and seeing whether I can really stay connected to both my own heart and the heart of the people that come and see me, that really does help. I mean, the other thing that I have done is I've written a book about a lot of these experiences and a lot of the, I guess, extracurricular things that I've learned above and beyond sort of physical medicine, to really give to my patients so that they can get a broader understanding of themselves, and most importantly, techniques to use to help to deepen that connection. And that has made a profound difference to the depth of medicine that I can offer people. And it's made a really big difference to my own job satisfaction in many ways, because I guess as the older that I get, the more the more curious I am about the human condition for myself and for my patients. And so the internet's been amazing from an educational perspective as well. So I can broaden those offerings outside of that one-on-one model as well.
I just have to personally say that I'm in love with your voice, and your words are incredible. I'm writing madly here because we put quotes up, Michelle, and you have an incredible way with words. I just had to say that because it's been so enjoyable just writing notes on what you are actually saying. It is profound. That's what it is. So what you went to achieve in Byron Bay, or I think you achieved it. I can really feel that in your voice, that you have a real passion for healing and for your patients and your clients. I've got a heap of questions that have come up as a result of it. And I really want to take you back to the Alfred Hospital, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I want to take you back to the mid-1990s and the AIDS crisis that was going on. And I have a personal reason for asking you this. So I lost 8 family members to acquired immune deficiency syndrome as a result of blood transfusions. They were hemophiliacs. But what I noticed, it wasn't so much the disease that killed my uncles and my aunts and one of my cousins. I feel it was the hysteria, number one. And number two, they were put on a medication that we could see the minute they were put on this medication. One of my uncles chose not to go on this medication, and he lived until, I think it was maybe it was in 2000 and something that he lived until. No, it was the 90s. It was the late 90s that he lived till. So how in Australia, this is the US, how in Australia was HIV and AIDS seen? And did you see many people that had blood transfusions that were in a bad way with HIV and AIDS?
Mm. Well, in my personal experience at the Alfred, so I was a resident at that stage. So I had, I think, 12, 14 weeks in the particular kind of rotation. And so during that time, I didn't see anyone there that had HIV or AIDS as a result of blood transfusion. So I guess that what I learned at the time, I was pretty young, so I was kind of really wide-eyed, and it was, from a medical student's perspective and my perspective, probably one of the most fascinating, I guess, infectious diseases around, because it taught you so much about the immune system and how the immune system protects us. And when we don't have a healthy immune system, the conditions that ensue and how a body kind of, I guess, the holistic nature of the body is so entwined with healthy immunity. I think too, like any kind of epidemic at the time, there is always a level of hysteria. We can see that recently with COVID-19, there becomes like a divisive aspect of that. You can see cracks in where you couldn't see them before. So, for example, the prejudice, to heterosexuality or different sexuality was evident through the HIV epidemic. And, likewise with COVID, the people that were anti-vaccinations or anti-mandates, or a lot of fear and anxiety and panic and loneliness was actually seen through the cracks of the system rather than, where it wasn't visible before. And so I think that where there's hysteria or crisis or panic or fear, it drives action, but there's often mistakes. And you can see that through neurobiology. Like when we're in a state of fear and panic, we don't have full access to our, forward thinking, planning, good judgment, etc. And so we're often bound to make mistakes in the early days of any kind of challenge to what is going on. And lives were being lost. And so always that, and young lives being lost, is really very engaging, and people rally around that. I think what saddened me at the time is that division between humanity. And I think that was one of the most painful things that created such a significant anxiety for me as a medical, young medical doctor, which then led to, my desire to kind of heal myself, because I broke. I mean, I was broken, panic attacks and couldn't sleep and etc. It was just too much to take on as a 23-year-old with no support. And so they're the kind of things that I saw. I think what is testament now to modern science is just our knowledge is so refined in that therapeutic element. So now, there's people that have had HIV and AIDS since the 80s and are still living, and had to redefine what they think their life is after being given kind of a death sentence. So it is human nature to make mistakes, particularly in such challenging kind of situations, and so much fear surrounding it. And that really was felt by the patients at the time and the families at that time. And it was really very traumatic.
Yeah, I lived through this with my mum. It was her brothers, and yes, mistakes were made, and we lost a generation. We lost a whole generation of a family. And then I watched my mum go into complete grief, and she ended up with lung cancer and passing away at a young age. So it wasn't just those that died of HIV and AIDS. It was those that were left. Like her other sister died of Budd-Chiari, which is the exact opposite to hemophilia almost, and that her liver just congested. And, it brings tears to my eyes that if they hadn't made that mistake, that maybe my family would still be alive. And you can't make mistakes like they made. And the same goes with the last 3 years. I'm sorry I get emotional, but I just think I lost a whole group of people and watched my mum go through hell with this. And the same thing happened in the last 3 years with the hysteria and the mistakes that were made. Like my dad died alone in Victoria, near you actually, and because we weren't allowed to get near him. Even when he's on his deathbed, we were not allowed to get near him. So I'm sorry, but the mistakes, I don't know if they're forgivable. I do not know if those mistakes that are being made are forgivable. Can you help me with that one? Because I know, Michelle, I can hear it in your voice that you may have an answer that I can't see forgiveness.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the short question or short answer is I don't have an answer. And I think that there's always repercussions of any choices that we make, whether they're positive repercussions or negative. I think that, I mean, this is the human experience, which is just so complex and so, it can be filled with such grief. And I think that one of the things that being within the system, I guess the benefit of knowing within the system is there's so many well-intentioned people. And I know that when people look within, from the outside in, that can be really difficult to see, because it is something that we want to try and, when we're in such a situation, we want to discharge blame, to those things. And as much as we can pinpoint some devastating situations, myself included, I have stories of devastation during that time. Mm. And some people had none of that. They don't share that. They had a positive experience through COVID-19 and all of the issues that ensued with that. I guess, recently I was reading Eddie Yarko's little book. I think it's called The Happiest Man on Earth.
Oh, yes, it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I just picked it up just recently, and just listening to a different, one man's story about his time in Germany at that time. And, as he started out a devout, a more devout German than he was a devout Jew. And then obviously, the Holocaust occurred, and just tragedy after tragedy. And some of his reflections in that book were so incredible about, his friend that he met, and then he found his sister. And so as much as we, I know that there's unforgivable acts, and there's nothing that I can say that will take those things away. But for the survivors, it's really important. Forgiveness is a really important embodied experience, because it can help us when we find those roadblocks through devastating things where we can't find an easy answer. Sometimes looking within is just such a powerful opportunity for us to explore an even greater understanding of connection and what our humanity means to us, and seeing whether we can actually sit with grief and devastation and atrocity and repulsion and those kind of things, and finding almost like that, like in Eddie Jacob's, case, and also Viktor Frankl, same sort of scenario, like atrocities. They found a measure of hope within themselves, a measure of dignity, a measure of morality that they then, I guess, claimed as their own. And one of the things that I deal with when I deal with people that have gone through difficult times is finding that little pearl that they can live in, the one thing that can't disempower them, that they can hold really true. And learning how to sit with grave discomfort is not easy. And it sounds really patronizing sometimes when somebody asks you to do that, when you just don't want to do that, that level of acceptance. And that's where sort of almost like Buddhism in medicine becomes such a powerful roadmap, for those tragedies. I mean, what you went through and losing, more than one, more than two, more than three family members is extraordinarily devastating, and such a rarity, within that system, and very, just deeply, deeply sad.
I actually read Robert Kennedy's book that he put out, and the first half of it is on hemophilia and AIDS. AIDS and HIV, and and what happened during that time. And I actually contacted him and told him what happened to our family. And he then contacted somebody else, and the two of them emailed me back and said that they know of no other family like mine. They don't know of anyone that went through what we went through with HIV and AIDS. So, yeah, it's
just that really is quite a remarkable and devastating story, and how that extended out. I mean, it's really, I can't imagine what that would be like, Cyndi.
And it still reverberates. I can tell you that. It just, like I have lots of cousins, and it still reverberates. But moving on from there, I found it interesting. I didn't know you'd written a book, Michelle. Could you tell us the name of the book? And then if you're giving it to every one of your clients, can you tell us the basics of what, because I always found as a nutritional practitioner that when I was telling people what to do, I said the same thing to everybody. You've got to eat real foods. You got to, you are saying the same thing. Yeah. There might be a few changes in, maybe try this, don't eat that, do that. But for the main part, it is saying the same thing. So what are your pearls to all of your clients, and the name of your book and the pearls to all of your clients that will help them on their journey back to health or maintaining health or whatever they come to you for?
Yeah. So the book is called The Wonder Within, and the byline is, it is a heart-led playbook for the anxious, stressed, and burnt out. And essentially what I wanted to offer people was a deeper understanding of their own neurobiology, meaning when you start to understand the body, your own body, and all of its nuances, you can start to use the body and the mind in a much greater capacity. And I think along the lines of like anxiety and burnout and stress, which in many ways were my greatest teachers. So that was my tendency. So my tendency was always to as I mentioned in the Alfred Hospital, I suffered some anxiety, and I was obviously stressed, and recently had experienced some burnout. And, from being within the system for 20 odd years or so. And what those experiences allowed me is to really understand how I work, how my survival adaptations work. So what the patterns were that allowed me to thrive in life, but also sometimes those patterns then come back and bite you and become the cause of future sufferings. And then I like to kind of be guided by helpfulness. So I'm a big believer in being the most of service to yourself, or the most of help to yourself. And often what happens when we're stressed or anxious or burnt out is that the nervous system isn't working in an optimal way, and we're not actually got access to all of the features and functionalities that help to settle down those conditions. So take anxiety, for example. When we're anxious, we're often not receiving the messages clearly. We're not perceiving the situation correctly, and we've lost access to our critical thinking, our forward planning, our big vision, of who we are and what we want to be. And so we get reduced down to kind of almost like a more infantile or animalistic part of ourselves, and those circles just recur and recur and recur. And then I also add in not only the neurobiology, but how it actually interconnects to the body. So our touch mechanisms, our sensations and emotional mechanisms, but also quite deeply about the science of the heart, and how the heart becomes almost like a filter for our perception, but it's also another way of relearning how to tap into our essence and our core. And there's lots of ways that the heart actually communicates with the whole body, but it doesn't use language. It uses sensations, emotions, and knowings. And so as you start to kind of go through the process, you can start to have a greater access to a deeper sense of yourself and a deeper truth. And there's lots of little practical examples about how you can navigate that space. But what I find about looking at the science is it gives people almost like a safe playground. It sort of takes out the kind of woo-woo, which I really do not like that word, but that's how people kind of understand it. But it takes away that woo sort of non-grounding aspect of, I guess, our holism, and brings it back into science. And so I draw in things like, holistic biology, holistic chemistry, holistic ecology, to understand how whole systems work. Because once we know that, we have much more access to so many more innate healing skills that we have that we can utilize. And then the last part of the book is really about some of the tips and some of the pitfalls of how we kind of, I guess, stay within a shame filter, or stay within that kind of rumination space that often occurs during these particular times, and describing how change occurs. And so we've got to wade through that middle bit of change, because often we'll come out of the blocks firing, as we all know. We sprint off the blocks and we've done our goals and our Excel spreadsheets and our planning, and then we hit the middle ground, and most of us tend to kind of flounder and want to go back to what was previously familiar. But in order to create transformation and change, you've got to understand what's going on in that middle ground, and using things like trust and patience and savoring, and to get you to, I guess, a different direction, a different state of being. And that's what burnout offers us, because it is actually a past tense experience. I mean, we're sort of like a match, we've burnt out. Like, we can't relight a dead match. We've got to change, and we've got to learn how to rejuvenate, and that little match has to go back into the earth and, become a tree again. It takes a little while. So understanding timing is also really important. So really critical concepts. And like you, Cyndi, yes, I did feel like I was often repeating myself to patients, but in order to get that depth, I had a patient in the other day who said, I haven't seen you for about 6 months because I've just been reading your book. So I've got you anyway. So she had it on Audible, and she was just driving around with me, kind of banging on about stuff too. So I'm doing myself out of business, which is a good thing.
Not at all. I think Audible's wonderful. I mean, I'm going to download it and have you in my ear for a while. I think I need your calmness and your, I don't know, there's something about your voice, Michelle, that I could listen to all day. It's got a timbre. It's got your like I've already said it, your remarks, your comments are incredible. I just and they bring enlightenment, I think. You make me think about, when you're talking about the heart, and, knowing the heart is for sensations and knowing experiences. Can you give me an example of that, please?
Yes, I love talking about the heart. This is my
good.
So there's a couple of critical things that I love people to understand about the heart space. So first of all, it is our first organ that is fully formed and functioning in the embryo. So by 4 weeks of age, inside that little tiny embryo, which is about the size of a sultana at that stage, we have a fully beating and fully formed heart. Now, that's about 8 weeks before the first nerve cell or brain cell has been created. So there is something quite incredible about the heart. It has a thing called autorhythmicity, which means that it beats on its own. And it acts as a receiver. And so one of the things that if the heart tells the brain what to do, it has to do it. But when the brain tells the heart what to do, or gives feedback to the heart, it can decide. And it can decide whether to sometimes ramp our heart rate up or go down, depending upon the scenario. It also has the greatest electromagnetic field out of the body. So we know that because we do the test, the ECG, that's actually picking up the energetics of the heart. And in fact, a magnetometer, which is a different kind of machine, will actually measure the heart electromagnetic field out to about 10 feet away. But in fact, it's thought to go out infinitely. So when we walk into a room, we'll often be sitting, well, we are sitting in somebody else's heart space, which is when we can walk into a room that has no words and that is silent, and we can pick up the energy of that room, whether it's full of joy or laughter. Sometimes if it is, we start laughing and we don't even know the joke. Or alternatively, we walk into a room, we know there's some tough energy in there, or some anger, or maybe, the two people might be having an argument. But what's really beautiful about that is that we can pick up each other's heart rate. And the heart communicates to every single cell in the body and has 4 ways of doing that. So I think back in the early 80s, it might have been 1986, the heart was reclassified as an endocrine organ. So there is a hormone that the heart produces that's only produced in the heart. And I'm not sure how creative these scientists were, but they called it atrial natriuretic factor. And it basically guides the blood vessels of their tone. And so it regulates blood pressure and heart rate. But it also has implications for fertility and reproductive health as well. And so it actually has global effects on the whole of the body. Just doesn't have a very exciting name, unfortunately. But we do produce things like serotonin, we produce oxytocin, we produce dopamine in our heart spaces. And the heart has a cardiac nervous system associated with it. So it actually has its own nervous system. And some research back in the 80s by Jonathan Lacey and his wife, I think, they showed that the heart can learn, it can think, it can sense, and it can remember all of its own. And so one of the things as I was starting to gather this information, and I started to look at a lot of poetry, and one of the things that profoundly helped me through this recent burnout journey was a poet, a Sufi poet by the name of Rumi, which I'm sure many of your listeners would have heard about. But Rumi is, honestly, this man was out of the ballpark with incredible wisdom, incredible joy, and just incredible, profound poetry. And so every day through, whether it was Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, I would, follow the Rumi, poetry. And every day seemed to be a remarkable quote that tended to help me for that particular day. So anyone that's listening, Rumi is, he really is a bit of a godsend. But the poets and the artists and the philosophers, ancient, 15th century, 2,000 years ago, would often speak in incredible qualities of the heart. And when I was younger, after that incident in the 90s that I was talking about, I went to Vietnam and I learned traditional Vietnamese medicine. And so it's very similar to Chinese medicine, but that was my particular journey in Vietnam. And I remember learning about the heart and how in Chinese medicine, it holds the Shen and the spirit. And in fact, when the heart is sad or in grief, it will affect every organ of the body. And that's very different to Western medicine, even though symptom-wise we kind of acknowledge that there's a mental health aspect to heart disease. But in fact, you'll often still hear today cardiologists basically disregarding, emotional or mental stress as a factor for heart disease. Yet we know that loneliness is a huge risk factor for heart disease, and we know that hostility is a risk factor for heart disease. Yet I had a patient even 2 days ago that said, I spoke to my cardiologist about, she's in an intimate partner, violent relationship. So, it's incredibly stressful, probably one of the most stressful. The cardiologist doesn't know that, but she asked him, could stress be playing a part in my heart disease? He said, no, not at all, not at all. And so I think there's a real mismatch between our understanding of our emotions as a whole. Still in Western medicine these days is a sort of fragmentation that, yes, emotional health or mental health issues affect mental health, but yet it still feels like a very grey area from a physical health perspective. But going back to poetry and Chinese medicine is that I started to become really fascinated by how, I guess, more ancient cultures and more ancient systems of medicine really, I guess, embraced the heart as the core tenet of the body. And, you know, a lot of the ways in which they sort of spoke about, and the heart had incredible depth. And that we have, you know, we can see it in our language, you know, when we have a heart-to-heart with someone, that refers to a deep conversation, or when we say they've got a brave heart or they're kind-hearted. We really are referring to people's core and essence. And I really love that. I don't think we do enough of that in medicine, to actually really bring someone's essence and core into their current level of health, whether it's good health or, you know, suboptimal health, and help them to engage in their essence to help them to gain better health, but for the longer term. Because I think when you don't engage the heart so much, then you're at risk of kind of, I guess, falling backwards into older patterns. So that's really, I guess, in part, a long answer to your question.
No, it was beautiful. Thank you.
I'm interested to know, beautiful Michelle, that medicine, and again, I'm going to bring it back to the science, that you are saying that many people want to hear the science, but you've also talked about ancient wisdom. And what about the anecdotal evidence? What about things that just work without any scientific explanation? The heart is such a barometer for how we feel mentally, emotionally, soulfully, spiritually, and physically. It must be very difficult for a surgeon or a doctor or a medical practitioner to differentiate the two, or bigger than that, bring it all together. How would you tell a medical practitioner, let alone us mere mortals who love anecdotal woohoo and all of the stuff, how would you tell a medical practitioner about the core and essence of a heart-to-heart talk, or a brave heart or kind-hearted person?
I think it's about, I love that. I love this question. I think it's such a good question, because I think I've thought about this a lot. And in my book, I actually go into a little bit of this. And I guess what I think has happened over the last 10 or 20 years is we've almost become obsessed by science, to the point where science is the only metric that we use in the medical model. But prior to that, historically, if you look at the philosophy and the history of both science and medicine, is that there was always an acknowledgement of the human being and humanity as a whole. And so throughout the book, it's laced with beautiful, you know, quotes from older doctors from generations ago, talking about, you know, the love of humanity and the need for that love of humanity to be infused into medicine. And when it becomes just a pure science, where it's like right, wrong, black, white, evidence, no evidence, etc., you lose the subtle nuance that is actually required for the human interaction that is occurring. And it's absolutely vital to have a love of humanity within medicine. And I think that when I was in my last year of medical school, there was a big push to what was called evidence-based medicine. And it came about by a professor in the UK called David Sackett. And he defined evidence-based medicine, which has become like the altar that we all kind of come to kneel by. But his definition of evidence-based medicine was the best evidence that we have at the time, plus the patient's belief systems, plus the clinician's clinical experience. So it never was about excluding the doctor-patient relationship. And I think that it's very easy to measure a research paper. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to bring down a complex idea, make it measurable, compare it to something else, and come out with an outcome or a result. But when you add in a doctor and a patient, you have got, variables that can never be tested. And I'm sure David Sackett would be, pulling his hair out like I do every day, going, I never meant it to mean this way. I never meant it to lose the essence of the human and the doctor-patient relationship, which we know is absolutely vital. And when I say doctor-patient, that can be any practitioner, any advisor in that field, could be coach, anything, that the relationship that comes in it, that caring environment. And so I think we've overdone the metric because we tend to do that in our society. Like, we don't like things that we don't measure, that we can't put on an Excel spreadsheet, we can't tick it off, and we can't, it's too loose for us as we sort of, create protocols and ideas and structure around that. And I think that becomes part of the issue. And that's where rapport and clinical skill and that nuance, and also the patient, learning how to turn up for themselves, understanding their powerful role in the relationship, not, a hierarchical kind of thing that the doctor knows everything and the patient doesn't. The patient knows so much about themselves, like if they can learn to empower themselves within those particular scenarios, it's likely the outcome is going to be better than a disempowered person entering the system, particularly in really serious illness. So, I agree with you. And that's why I love, I guess, explaining the science as well. I mean, the other thing to note too, Kim, is that the density of medical research and scientific research is just growing at such an exponential rate. I think back 50 years ago, we used to double the amount of research that we had every 10 years. It now doubles every year. And that's just an exponential thing. So there's not one person that can be au fait with every aspect. And you can see, because of the research, people are becoming more and more subspecialized. But at the cost of that essence of holism. And I think sometimes what happens in our research methodology is we're really happy to zone in, but we find it really much more difficult to zone out, and look back at the big picture, and so that we can integrate that scientific wisdom into the wisdom of the humanity, into that ancient wisdom that we know. And I think what we're going to find is, what I've become really fascinated with, is Indigenous wisdom. And because I think, with global warming and now, the medical system being under such pressure and so many systems being under such pressure, the Indigenous wisdom is all about holism and inclusivity and connection. And they just seem to have a depth of understanding about how you can look after the whole community, and then that will help to look after the individual. So they turn everything, or seem to turn everything on their head. But I love bringing that in to my understanding as a practitioner and as a doctor, to understand the whole. And it's difficult in our modern day research methods to actually investigate holistic care because it's very complex. So our scientific method is actually reductionistic by nature. So it's difficult to, actually look at a holistic system with a reductionistic mindset.
It's almost like it's a very fixed mindset, though, isn't it? Like it seems like I've always questioned, people would say, well, Kim, you don't have an academic degree. I do have a number of diplomas, but it's not a degree. And therefore, who am I to have the right to say these things? And yet we can hear two Harvard professors on complete different ends of the spectrum debating a single thing. I'm just curious then, from your point of view, Has medicine become so pharmaceutical and wrapped up in science associated to making money, as opposed to a biological principle based on the foundation of humanity and that there's a real person in that body? We only have to think about antidepressants or over-the-counter medications to see that we as humans are wanting the quick fix. So I'm not placing all the blame on medicine. But is it because it's become so greed and ego-driven around money, in your opinion? Or how do we have other medical practitioners, as Cyndi and I always question, to think more like you?
That's very kind of you to say, but I think it comes down to the individual. I think that the system is really quite pressured. And I think when people work in a system that is pressured and job satisfaction is affected, then that can affect their ability to cope and make really good decisions. Having said that, I still am astounded by the level of compassion and care that I see, when I go to professional meetings, and people still find that inspiration, even if they're not, holistically minded or integrative. But there's around 30 to 35% of GPs, and I can probably only really speak for GPs, but that would consider themselves integrative. But I guess that definition is also varied. So some people will think an integrative doctor is somebody that's done training in nutritional, environmental medicine, maybe mind-body medicine, etc. And then other people will just, go through the biopsychosocial model and consider that an integrative approach. And both are correct, essentially. It's just difficult for a consumer to actually understand the difference. And so that is a challenge. I think in terms of greed as well, like when people do start getting lower job satisfaction or they are feeling stressed, that's when things like greed does come in. And to be fair on the individual practitioners, the government has been very short-sighted in the way that they have supported general practitioners or general practice over, historic, like 20 or so years, maybe 10 years even more poorly. So there's a lot of doctors still trying to do the same amount of work with less funds, inflation, Medicare freezes, etc. The pharmaceutical side of things is an interesting argument that you bring up. I do think that with the short consultations, it's much easier to finish a consultation with a prescription than it is to finish it with a holistic model of care. So you do require a lot more time in which to kind of investigate the human being in front of you. If the way that you practice medicine doesn't allow for time, then the natural outcome is going to probably be an offering of more pharmaceutical medications. And we know that from a research perspective, the shorter that a doctor spends with a patient, the more likely they are to get a prescription medication. And sometimes that might be equated to greed. There's some doctors that like to see lots and lots and lots of patients quickly. But I don't think that's the only measure of their pursuit, because I think sometimes they might be working in very rural communities and they actually don't have much more than 5 minutes. So again, when we look at individuals, within a system, I think we always have to look at the way that the system supports those individuals. And when the individuals are stressed within a system, then usually ethically or there may be some more questionable behaviour. But having said that, it blows me away, the passion that I still see on the streets, at that grassroots level in general practice, that are not pursuing that pharmaceutical model of care. So hard to say. But yes, I think I do see a group of patients that do feel a bit disgruntled by that shorter quick fix medicine. And, your point too, Kim, is that we do have a tendency to want to fix things quickly. It may be a desire to get back into a really good life, or, we might be walking the Camino and we've sprained our ankle and we want it fixed by the next day because we want to get up and keep going again. So we're not really good as a culture at the moment, or as a society, of being sick and letting time heal and being patient. And so I think we've kind of been sold that over the years as well, with our striving culture. So I think there's a lot of ways to skin that question, and philosophically, there's multiple different opinions.
Just going to the quick fix, because it seems that that's what humanity wants, is, the quick fix. Through the last couple of years, we realised that people that didn't have chronic disease, who had looked after themselves, that had eaten well, had, maintained their health the best they can, were not as likely to fall prey to the virus as to somebody who had a metabolic disease, or had, heart disease or diabetes, or had obesity. So I read a book, and I don't know if you've read it, but it was a book that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was called Mutant Messages Down Under. And it's very much on Indigenous wisdom. And one of the things that they talked about, which is about this quick fix I'm going to tell you about, is that there was, I guess, a lesson to be taught by the woman who's the author, by this Indigenous group. And the lesson was that how fast the body can heal. And it's very much about a belief system. So this person falls off a cliff, breaks his leg, a compound fracture. They do a healing on him, and he's walking 24 hours later. Now, is this a fiction, or is this Indigenous wisdom? And have we lost the knowledge that maybe we can have a quick fix, but in a different way? We don't need that medication. And just your love of Indigenous wisdom, I don't know if you've read the book, but you probably would enjoy reading it, because it's a lot about Indigenous wisdom, about their food, about their healing, about their communication, about everything that they do. So and going on from that, Graham Hancock has a series on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse. And he believes that there was an apocalypse, I think it was like 7,000 years ago, which wiped out an incredible civilization, like many incredible civilizations, and the wisdom and the knowledge of these civilizations. And he talks about these incredible healings and how they moved objects. And so I wonder, have we lost that Indigenous wisdom so much that we can't believe that the body can get itself well, given the right ingredients, the right resources? Have we lost that much? Or do you think that I'm just barking up a tree that doesn't exist?
Look, to be honest, I don't really know, but I had I guess a teacher student relationship with an old medicine man from the northeast of Victoria, back about, I don't know, probably close to 20 years ago. And he took a couple of us under his wing, and he taught at Monash Medical School. And he would just give us the inklings of some pretty spectacular stories, but without really giving us enough to, I guess, to sink our sort of teeth into and truly understand. And I remember some of the things that he would say, and they were so curious and so mind-blowing that it would just take me so long. I couldn't actually process them because they were so mind-blowing. But what I did know is this man had, like, I don't know, he was the 700th incarnation, of medicine man in this country. And so he, his depth of wisdom and his transcendence and his transgenerational wisdom was extraordinary, unparalleled, really. So it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge that there is so many things that I don't think that we know. And can we get it back? I don't know. It doesn't look like we're in a great particular situation as a society. However, I do think that disruption and the kind of chaos that we're sort of seeing, like, and even COVID-19 did reveal a lot of the cracks in our systems, whether it's medicine, education, government, etc. And you have to see those cracks. You have to have that sense of disruption and fear, of systems breaking down before a system can change. So I think it's also about holding ourselves with curiosity and just and engaging in some trust and understanding. I think that there's so much we don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there's individuals that do know that. But as a medical system, not sure. I mean, I remember reading things from Russia. They sometimes have the most incredible research coming out of Russia. So, I think globally, like, if we had a system where we could really collect wisdom, that would be wonderful. Are we ready for it? I don't know.
Let me give you just one story. I've got a couple of stories of these profound healings, but I have one that's very close. So it's my husband's brother, and he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it didn't have a good outcome. That was what he was told. And he met this nurse in the hospital when he was being treated, and the nurse just said, "Why don't you come to my church? We do faith healings." And so he decided, well, what have I got to lose? So he ends up at this church and they do a faith healing on him. And basically the next time they did a scan on him, he had no more brain tumor left.
Yeah.
So this is my husband's brother. So, how do we figure that one out? How does something like that happen? We know these faith healings are happening everywhere because you hear about them all the time. I had another one, and Kim knows about this one because I was just blown away by it. But I met a guy on a plane and he told me, I asked him about mutant messages down under because he was Indigenous and he'd never heard of it. But he said, "Let me tell you about what happened to me." And he tells me about, like, he's unconscious and they say he's never going to walk again, and he has glass throughout his body. And the medicine man comes in, and by the time the medicine man's finished with him, he's sitting up and there's nothing for the hospital to do, and they let him go. So we know these exist. You've just talked about this Northeast Victorian Indigenous healer. Now I'm intrigued. I want to meet him. I know it's there, but I don't know how we tap into it. And I feel like it's doctors like you that may open up this portal, because that's all I can call it, is a portal into another world that can teach us these miraculous healings. But I don't.
Yeah, there was a book written, Dr. Kelly Turner, and she traveled the world she was fascinated by radical remissions. And that's what it's called, radical remission. And she interviews 1,000 people across the globe, from Japan to South America to the Americas to Australia, wherever. And she collected these people. She's a social scientist. I think she did her PhD on that. And she, a little bit like Brené Brown did, just through conversation and story about finding out what these people did when they were diagnosed with a stage 4 or incurable tumor. So they were the doctors had said, yes, it's not curable. So that was her criteria to be engaged in this study. And then she deciphered through looking at storytelling techniques, which is a sociology, I guess, research method, and came up with 9 different criteria that people that had experienced a radical remission did. So things like change their diet, their mindset, engaged in spirituality, kind of had a unique sort of personalized mantra, exercise, those kind of things. And so it becomes like a little booklet. But I think I had a patient the other day who's, one of my favorite patients. I've known her for a long time, and when it was about 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with a stage 4 renal tumor. And I remember talking to her in the hospital bed. It was actually, I think, the night before Christmas that she'd found out, and had a kidney removed, and I think she refused chemotherapy, but she did go on biologics, immunotherapy for that. And, her diet was exceptional anyway, but she even further improved it, exercised, did some meditation, mindset, etc. And she's in remission. And her doctor, who has been really supportive and very congratulatory and really kind to her in many ways, he still won't ask the question of what she's done differently. And we were speaking about it the other day. She's like, I just want him to ask me what I did. Like, I want him to ask me. And we kind of came to this, like, I think we've got to answer your question, Cyndi, we have to ask questions about these things. Like, we have to ask questions of people that do heal in different ways. What did they do? And it's not necessarily what they did, but it's, I think, what Kelly Turner's point is that there's a whole collection of different things that people do to heal, from really believing and engaging in their own innate empowerment. I think that's really important. Mind-body medicine and body-mind medicine is really profound for people like that. That will to live and that fighting spirit has got some research behind it to kind of, we know that matters. This kind of determination can play a really significant role. And a whole raft of different things. But yes, definitely we've got to ask more questions. And at the same time, for those that don't experience a radical remission, not to pass the blame on that, because I do think there's an element of timing, in life. And I think when you spend time with people that are incredibly enlightened, there is an aspect of, like, I guess, understanding that life and time and space actually are made up concepts, too. So yeah, it's vast. I mean, I'm a practitioner and not a research scientist, because I couldn't be a research scientist. It's too fiddly for me. Like, I'm too big picture. And I like the clinician space with the spaciousness and the humanity that's involved. I like the muddy waters, and I like the individuality and the uniqueness of the human journey that kind of goes into it. But what I would say to people that, maybe in that experience is, that looking within, that deep introspection can be such a gift to help people not only cope, but to find internal resources for themselves that they may not even have known were there. And what you do with those internal resources is a very creative space. And I encourage my patients to be, the captains, and that's where the heart, coming back to the heart, is like, it's that governor, it's that leader of the microcosm that you are.
And asking questions or having inquiry or, whatever that is, Bren Brown basically says it shows vulnerability and courage.
That's right.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that some people will have that inquiry and will ask questions and other people won't. For instance, my nephew had I don't know how to say it, but you'll know what I'm talking about, intrasuspection.
Yep.
And lost 80 centimetres of his gut, as his small intestine, as well as his appendix. And, then it was about healing. And so my brother and sister-in-law got together and they did basically gaps on steroids with him, took him back to the surgeon, and the surgeon was blown away by the fact that everything seemed to be working fine. He had no deficiencies, no issues, no anything. And my brother was waiting for him to ask what he had done, and he wasn't asked. And so he said to the gastroenterologist, he said, well, we're doing this program. And he said, you know what? I am the plumber. I'm brilliant at plumbing. I know nothing about what you are talking about, but keep it up. And I thought that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Like his speciality was plumbing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I can see that. Like, it's difficult to actually, be one person, be everything for one person. And I think that's the point that you make, is that there still is this fragmentation within the system that, and this hierarchy of that, a certain type of healing modality is preferred to another type, like take nutrition, as an example, is it's kind of relegated down to sort of, 10th or 15th position. Whereas in my opinion, it should be, number one or number two. And that's the thing. It's like where we emphasize is really important too. Like what is important. Now, obviously, taking out a piece of dead bowel, absolutely critical. Like you've got to do that. Otherwise a person's going to die, honestly. And so that's obviously, first port of call. But then, nutrition and healing, is often subjugated down the list. Whereas sometimes it's got to be before the plumbing, in a different kind of scenario as well.
Yeah. But I tell you what, if I'm in an emergency, I don't want anyone asking me about my nutrition or my sleep habits or my my relationships or my environment.
You just want them getting that defibrillator out if you need to, and don't ask me about whether I meditated this morning.
Yeah, exactly. And it is horses for courses. That's just that I feel, and I'm just so excited about the fact that you said 30 to 35% of GPs consider themselves integrative. It doesn't matter what realm they're on. At least they're on that realm.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited by that. But we also need our specialists. We need our emergency cares. We need those ones that know how to take out 80 centimetres of bowel and not kill the child, or, fix a heart that's stopped, or whatever the emergency might be. We have to have them. I just think sometimes that there's one, like medicine seems to want to have it all. And I don't know if it's medicine and GPs and doctors, and I don't think it's the people, it's the beast.
Yeah, I think it's the beast. And I think it's like, it's a suffocating system. I think it needs a whole injection of funding and new ways of doing things. I think the speed of medicine, this kind of thing of like you only get 5, 10, 15 minutes with the practitioner, is inherently flawed. And most of our conditions are chronic diseases now that require a completely different model of care, where we need, nutritionists, naturopaths, exercise physiologists, physios. Like we need the whole spectrum to re-educate people from a society that has really kind of given people like an assumed health and wellness. You can eat whatever you like and not do any exercise and expect to be well. Like we're still, like, people are getting shocked by getting a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. It's like,
yeah,
you're so shocked. Like, honestly, like, but that's obviously an education thing. I'm not, not denigrating the person that might be in that scenario. So health literacy is so important, understanding, the basis of soil health and food health and, economics and cooking, and all of those things are just like they got taken for granted. And then the speed of society started to increase, and then marketing and advertising started to increase. And so we were almost like victims to some pretty poor structural changes, allowing us to advertise junk food to kids. And even the fact that we call it junk food, I mean, it should never have been called food in many regards. I'm sure you'd agree with me, Cyndi.
Yeah.
And, placing of lollipops near the checkout, and, I used to go play tennis on a Friday, and the kids would come with us and they'd play on one court and we'd play on the other, and they'd get a lollipop after the tennis. It's just like, oh my God.
Or a McDonald's
voucher.
If
won the best on ground kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
It comes back to greed. I'm sorry. It comes back to people lining their pockets without a conscience around what this food is. Dr. Libby Weaver always says it's not junk food, it's just junk. Take the word food, like you just said, away. I would love to, I know we've got to come to a close, beautiful Michelle, but there's just so many incredible questions and conversations we could have. But one thing we haven't really touched on, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Human beings are remarkable creatures, and there's certain things that we cannot analyze or perhaps even research or even bring together some sort of information. But the placebo effect with many of our research situations suggests to me the power of the mind is one of our most incredible weapons and perhaps one of our most incredible tools. You have studied in the art of hypnotherapy. Do you think the power of the mind is just as critical in medicine from a holistic point of view, and working with the unconscious mind, getting people in and out of the trances or the stories that they believe or the history that they think they're actually a victim of, or whatever it is? Our thoughts create a heck of a lot to do with our health and wellness. What would be a final tip you would say to our gorgeous Up for a Chat listener around the power of their mind and their thinking and the unconscious beliefs that we hold to be true?
Oh, I mean, is it the most powerful tool we have? Yes, 100%. Do we know how best to kind of utilize it? No. Are we scared of it? I think yes. I think we are scared of our own potential in some ways. And I think that we have the most incredible organism. I mean, when we combine the power of the human consciousness, there's nothing known to be more incredible in our history. Add that to the compassion of the human heart. I just think the combination is quite incredible. And I think what I would say to people is to not be afraid of it. I thought of a quote, Cyndi, you'll like this one, is that healing is never as easy as we hope it to be, but it is never as hard as we think. And I think often we stop ourselves from engaging in new ways of discovering health because we're afraid of what we might see in ourselves. And through my 25 years or whatever it is, I have never seen anyone reveal anything of themselves that is as frightening as they once thought. And I think that's really important to remember, because a lot of people don't want to explore that area because they think that it's going to unwrap something that they don't want to see. And I've never seen it happen. And we are so much more powerful as light beings, as positive beings, than we are as negative and dark and dangerous. I mean, there's always that aspect to us, like we are shadows of light and dark. But it's always kind of ends, like we run these retreats, a colleague and I, we're actually off on Friday, to Bali to run them. But the connection and the healing at the end of like a weekend or a week-long retreat is just profound for everyone. So, yeah, I would really highly recommend your listeners really engage in the possibility that there is more internal resources that they can navigate their way through than not. And as much as I know the power of nutrition and exercise and sleep, water and healthy lifestyle, sometimes what happens is you see if someone's got a very significant inner critic or a shame shower that they take every morning, really have to address those things in which to really reap the benefits of the healthy lifestyle, to really get that optimal level of health and be able to maintain and sustain it over the long term.
It's as complex as it is simple.
Correct.
In really so many ways.
And as simple as it is complex. So.
That's right. Such a beautiful paradigm in that, really. And I guess that comes back to your own belief systems, mindset, and the intention with which you do want to heal or grow as a human. If people wanted to learn more about your beautiful retreats, your incredible book called The Wonder Within, or how they could even have consults with someone like you, could you give us all your social handles or where we can best connect?
So my website is theholisticgp.com.au, and the retreat website is enliven-retreats.com.au, and same Instagram handle at theholisticgp. LinkedIn, I'm Dr Michelle Woolhouse, and we have an Instagram handle for Enliven Retreats. And so we're releasing the 2024 dates in the next month or so after we get back from Bali. And yeah, it's a great opportunity to really do a deep dive into really sustainable, long-term health, mentally, emotionally, and physically.
It's just so powerful. And when people take that step, feeling that it might be a bit scary even to do it on your own, because sometimes many families or relationships, one may be really into it and the other just be guided by your beautiful heart. If this is speaking to you, make sure you go and check out our beautiful Dr. Michelle Woolhouse and ensure that you will be in safe hands. And nothing is ever as hard as it seems. I love this because it may seem a little bit scary going to one of these retreats, even if it is on your own, but we all know that connection, which perhaps is one of the greatest of all medicines, could be one of the most powerful things that your heart is calling for. I did just have one last question. Sorry, Cyndi, because you've talked so much about the heart, and you can answer it in a simple yes or no. But we hear so often of, someone dies and not long after someone else does. Do you, in your heart of hearts, believe that we can die of a broken heart?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Well, there's actually a syndrome called Takisumo syndrome, where the heart actually, under enormous sort of stress and pressure, and often that's, the death of a loved one. It's often surrounding something of enormous grief of someone very dear to you, is that the nervous system actually, it almost does, it sort of flips into opposition. So the sympathetic nervous system will shut down, and rather than speed up, and then the heart actually blows up and can suddenly stop. It's very rare, but it does happen. But yeah, you often hear of stories of people that have been together for 50 or 60 years, and within a couple of weeks or a couple of months, there's passing. And I mean, often colloquially, we know people die of a broken heart, which was back to our original kind of thing of like, we are holistic beings. I mean, there is nothing more scientifically true than we are holistic beings, like we are whole. And if we continue to reduce ourselves down to just separate parts without building ourselves back up, we're living in a system which has lesser than when we are whole. And it's very important to recognize that the power of holism is so important. And yes, you can die of a broken heart, and that's the beauty and the sadness of life. Yeah.
Which is why we are wanting you to really look out for our lovely Michelle, because this work perhaps is one of the most key ingredients to a sustained, long, energetic, vibrant life.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you from our hearts to yours. And now every time I say the word heart, I'm going to feel even more connected to it, because there is that line, hand on heart, or with heartfelt thanks. Like, it really is such an extraordinary word, isn't it, beautiful Cyndi?
Yeah, my heart feels very expansive at the moment. So I'm hoping it's going to both of you and to the rest of our listeners.
Thank you, Cyndi and Kim. What a divine interview. Thanks for all your gorgeous work.
And thank you, Michelle. We'll be watching out for that retreat in 2024.
Be warned. Be very warned.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.